Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all doing well today. It is a rainy and cold day here in Tennessee, and the leaves are coming down. And in this time of year, when it's a bit rainy, starting to get colder, and the season changes, it causes for some reflection in life, as all of the different seasons have a story to tell. So what I wanted to talk about today a little bit is something that I've thought about for years past, I should say, and I think every year perhaps in my mind it's refined a little bit more how everything interconnects in life. And very specifically, these emotions get invoked around the holiday of Halloween here in the US, because even though I don't participate in any way in the holiday of Halloween, it comes up. As you drive around, you start to see the ghouls and the gore and the death that the secular world celebrates. And not only the secular world, but unfortunately people who claim to be Christians sometimes participate in these events and these decorations. And I really think it shows the depravity of the world we live in, especially here in the Western world. I know things are a little different elsewhere. Every culture has their nuances. And this is coming from a Western perspective. But one of the things that I think shows the deep deception in this season, without going into origins and history and that sort of thing, is quite a simple principle. If you celebrate death, death you will receive. And you can see the spiritual blindness in our culture. So many people, when they look at the endless news cycle of violence, they see depraved people going to schools and unleashing unimaginable horrors on people just going about their day. No longer just crimes of impulse, but well-calculated evil increasing in the culture, premeditated, wicked, and vile. And it's like the pieces don't match. You look around and people are saying, I just can't believe that person did that, or I didn't see it coming, or violence is just going crazy. We need to do something about it. It's the guns are the problem. Or something of the sort. Whether it's liberal or conservative, they all have their different answers to these issues that completely miss the point, the spiritual point behind all of it, is that if the infatuation with death and horror isn't dealt with on an inner level, it can't be dealt with on the outside. If you don't clean up the inside of the cup, don't expect the outside of the cup to stay clean. So I think about it, and I just see the hypocrisy behind it. So many people look at it as it's just a joke, or I don't really celebrate death, it's just to be funny, a skeleton popping out and scaring somebody, it's just funny, it doesn't really mean anything, it's just benign. I've heard people use the same arguments against music. It's just music, it doesn't really matter what you listen to. Everything in life matters. And people celebrate gore, the genre of zombies, zombie-related fictional movies has increased. Exposed flesh and all of this gore, this just vile form of entertainment flourishes. Everything around the idea of Halloween. And when you look into history and realize that a lot of it stems from the Catholic Church and their selling of soul cakes, really opens your eyes to how corrupt anything other than following the way, the truth, and the life. Everything else, every other path leads to death. And Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. To follow the way, to follow the truth, you have to love life. You have to respect life. You have to cherish life, not death. And in our culture, we love the spiral of death. Now, there is a Hindu version of the spiral of death, and that is through the idea of reincarnation, whereas when you die, you are reborn. You are sort of being enlightened. If you were a bad person, you may come back as a lesser life form. But to see, since reincarnation is part of your atonement, then death must continue on forever, because you always need wickedness to help those pursuing righteousness atone. So reincarnation by definition means that death has to continue on for an infinity. And that's why it's called the spiral of death. Many people don't know that about Hinduism. It's actually based on the concept of the spiral of death. And we know through Jesus Christ, for those in Christ, that one day that suffering will end. The tears from our eyes will be wiped away, and there will be no more pain and suffering. See, in Christianity, in the following of Jesus Christ, there is no spiral of death. So what about the Western spiral of death? I shared a little bit about the Hindu spiral of death, but what about the Western spiral of death? It's the infatuation with gore, the infatuation with horror, the infatuation with violence. Everybody just has their own slight takes on it. The horror genre of films has become very popular, I've seen over the last several years. People love to just get the adrenaline of the fear, something like that. And then the things that maybe aren't as severe that have been normalized in culture through fantasy media. And that is the endless watching of movies that include violence. But see, it's very deceptive. See, we elevate the superhero and we vilify the villain, but yet the superhero himself is an ungodly figure, is a form of Antichrist. You look at Marvel, DC, of the likes, the glorification of violence under the disguise of the good guy, the good versus evil, all wicked fantasy in the eyes of the Lord. So we focus and love the violence which we framed as our legends of good and evil, the horror films, the celebration of death, the decorations, the cobwebs, the spiders, the trickery, the joking, the skeletons, everything that involved with it. We celebrate those things. So, by celebrating death, we perpetuate a spiral of death, because if in your heart you wanted death, pain, and suffering to cease, you would flee from it. You wouldn't run to it. You run to something that you have an affinity for. If you have an affinity for that person, you run toward them because you want to embrace them. But if you have an affinity for death, you will embrace death in your life in one way or another. whether it's putting a skeleton in your lawn or whether it's watching a movie that glorifies violence. Don't be surprised when you see violence in the world. Don't be surprised when you see wars and rumors of wars in the world. Don't be surprised, because you celebrate death, and because you celebrate death, death you receive. Now, what Christians are promised is we won't escape persecution. Some of us won't even escape death or martyrdom. But see, we will be delivered through death to eternal peace. We won't be delivered necessarily from death, because even if we aren't killed, we'll either be raptured or we'll die of natural causes. So the Christian suffers too and has to deal with death. But for the Christian, death has a finality. It has a final end. It is not for eternity. It's not an eternal spiral. And for those who celebrate the spiral of death, you will partake of the spiral of death for all eternity in hell, which the lake of fire is going to be cast into. So I implore anyone watching this video, whether a believer or not, if you're not a believer, turn from death to Jesus Christ. And if you are a believer, take this as a warning to recommit to not celebrating any form of death, even if it's fantasistical death, through media, through the developing of characters to tell a story, to glorify death, to recreate death for the sake of entertainment. Run from the spiral of death.